Hey there, folks. Well, I didn't expect to be making this video so soon, and if you watched my previously released video on Dale Stehling, then you know I've been trying for years to get the records on this case from Mesa Verde. There is so much of that incident that has been left a mystery. Then, all of a sudden, after years of essentially ignoring me, they decided to finally just relent and release the records to me. I got to admit, I wasn't sure that this would ever happen, much less this quickly after I made my previous video on Dale Stehling, but either way, here we are. And once I got the case file, I knew I had to drop everything else and release a new video update on this. And just to address some of the comments I saw in the previous video, yes, I did file a FOIA request for these records after Dale's remains were found back in 2021. It really shouldn't have taken this long. And some folks thought that I was getting a little too conspiratorial about the NPS, and that may be true, but it was somewhat warranted. For example, in 2022, I was told that my request was 46th in line, meaning that there were 45 requests ahead of mine. That's not bad, and I was pretty optimistic about it. However, almost 2 years later, when they finally did release the records to me, they sent me a letter saying I was 75th in line. But since I had been waiting a while, they're going to help me out and just fulfill the request immediately. So again, in 2022, I was 46th in line, and 2 years later, I had somehow become 75th in line. So after 2 years, my request was not moving forward, it was moving back. I feel it's likely that if I had just left things alone, I probably never would have received a response at all. Anyway, it's all pretty much irrelevant now, because I got the records, so let's move on. So the way I'm going to do this is basically go through their investigation step by step, and see what was going on behind the scenes that we were not privy to prior to this. I would suggest that you have watched my recent video on Dale Stehling, but it's probably not all that necessary. It would still be helpful to have some of the background information that's in that video, and the previous video will undoubtedly have pretty much all of the on-the-trail footage that I don't really have a reason to include in this one. And besides all that, I think this will be very interesting to anyone who watched that previous video, where we could only guess at what was happening, because now you get to hear what was actually going on, and see how accurate or inaccurate the previous video was. You're going to be getting the same story as the last video, but from a completely new perspective. I think some folks will be quite surprised. Anyway, let's get into all the details about what actually happened to Dale Stehling in Mesa Verde back in 2013. Mitchell Dale Stehling was 51 years old in June of 2013. He lived in Goliad, Texas with his wife Deneen, who worked as a pediatric nurse. Dale worked for many years as a meat cutter and market manager for various stores before retiring. The couple had been married for 32 years, and during that time they had raised 4 children together, 2 daughters and 2 sons. Dale was a smoker. He reportedly smoked about a pack a day. He had little or no experience in hiking or being in the mountains, although he did like to spend more time outdoors as he got older. He enjoyed fishing, gardening, hunting, and processing his own meat. Dale liked to walk, but not necessarily hike. His legs would cramp often, and he would need to stop and rest. He would also get lost easily, and he had a tendency to keep going when he got lost, rather than stop and figure out where he was. Dale was still a fit man at 6 feet tall and 200 pounds. He often went on long walks by himself. On Thursday, June 6th of 2013, Dale Stehling began a road trip with his wife Deneen and also his parents. They left from Goliad, Texas as soon as Deneen got off work. The trip had been in planning for around a year, and they intended to be on the road for about 20 days. The plan was to see various national parks and monuments throughout New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, and Wyoming. Dale was especially excited to be visiting Yellowstone National Park. They were all traveling in an RV, which was pulling a silver Ford Focus behind it. Eventually, they would make their way out to Oregon, where Dale and Deneen would fly back home while his parents would drive. They spent the night of June 6th in a town in West Texas. On Friday, June 7th, they made it to Albuquerque, New Mexico, where the RV started developing some mechanical problems. Still, they pressed on to Gallup, New Mexico, where they spent the night. On the morning of Saturday, June 8th, the RV was taken to a mechanic where they were told that it couldn't be worked on until Monday. Since the four pretty much had the entire weekend to wait, they decided to take some day trips in the Ford Focus. That Saturday, they went to the Canyon de Chelly National Monument, and everything went fine. On Sunday, June 9th, they took another day trip and visited the Four Corners on the Navajo Reservation. Afterwards, they began heading to Mesa Verde National Park. The group arrived at the Mesa Verde Visitor and Research Center around 1:15 to 1:45 p.m. They talked to a ranger at the information desk about what they could do in the park with about half a day. Dale bought a baseball cap from the store, and then the group drove into the park. After entering, they stopped briefly at one of the many overlooks, spending some time taking in the view and reading the interpretive signs. They then began heading to the Chapin Mesa where they had lunch, with Dale eating a sandwich and a Coke. Reportedly, he was also drinking a lot of water throughout the day and staying hydrated. The Chapin Mesa is one of the two main mesas within the park and contains many of the most popular attractions. At around 3:30 to 4 p.m., the group watched an introductory film and then walked through the museum at the Spruce Tree Terrace. They saw the Spruce Tree House cliff dwelling behind the museum, and Dale decided he wanted to go and see it up close. Back in 2013, the Spruce Tree House was a self-guided area with a couple of rangers stationed at the dwelling to answer any questions a visitor might have. Today, the area is closed. Deneen and Dale's parents believed that the quarter-mile loop to the Spruce Tree House would be too much of a hike for them. Instead, they decided to wait on the balcony of the Chief Ranger's office, where there is a good view of the cliff dwelling and also the people inside of it. Essentially, they figured they could keep an eye on Dale while he went on the hike alone. Deneen offered to run to the car and get Dale a bottle of water, but he replied that he didn't need any of it because he was just going over there. The family believed that they could even zoom in enough with their camera to get a picture of Dale as he went down into the dwelling. One of Dale's parents remembered asking Dale, "Are you going to go to the Spruce Tree House?" with Dale responding, "Well, I'm going to go do something." Dale started down the trail at 4:15 p.m., and just before disappearing from view, he looked up towards his family and waved. Deneen couldn't remember if he said, "I'll see you in a minute," or if she was the one to make the statement. Dale left with only his wallet, cell phone, cigarettes, and a lighter. As Deneen watched for Dale to arrive down at the treehouse, she noticed that other visitors that had started down after him were arriving there before him. Deneen would later tell rangers that her husband was not a hiker but a walker, so she figured it would take him approximately an hour to get there, explore, and then get back to the balcony. At some point, a female park visitor arrived and joined Deneen on the balcony. The woman was hot, sweaty, and commented on how tired she was because she had taken the wrong trail and ended up hiking further than she expected. The fact that there were other trails leading off of the Spruce Treehouse Trail was news to the Stehling family. Deneen then went to check with a ranger at the museum information desk, who informed her that there were indeed other trails leading off from the Spruce Treehouse Trail. Deneen went back to the balcony to tell Dale's parents about this new information. At approximately 5:15 p.m., Deneen went back to the museum information desk and talked with a Ranger Aragon. She told him that Dale went down to the Spruce Treehouse about an hour prior and she hadn't seen him since. Ranger Aragon showed her a map and explained the trails and distances in the area. He told her that if Dale had taken one of the other trails, it could easily be 2.5 to 3 hours before he got back. Deneen left a note with Ranger Aragon in case she missed him coming back. It said, "Dale, wait for me here at the museum." At approximately 6:15 p.m., Deneen returned to the museum and checked with Ranger Aragon again. She reiterated that she was worried about Dale before wandering through the museum a bit and returning to the balcony. At 6:45 p.m., the museum was closed, so Deneen went to the Chief Ranger's office and talked to a dispatcher named Samantha. Deneen was again told that it was not uncommon for people to decide that they want to go and see the petroglyphs, and then head down the trail, not realizing how long it would take. The trail that the dispatcher is referencing is the Petroglyph Trail, which is a 2.5-mile loop trail that runs along a very steep canyon. The highlight of the trail are the ancient pictographs carved into the cliff wall. Deneen asked the dispatcher, "At what point should I start to worry?" And the dispatcher told her to give Dale about 3.5 hours, but if at any point you start to really worry, let me know and I will call out a search party. An hour later, at 6:45 p.m., Deneen returned to the Chief Ranger's office and requested a search party from dispatcher Samantha. She told Deneen that she would have a ranger meet her on the balcony to get more information. At this point, law enforcement rangers Andrew Mankis and Shane Kempf were informed of the situation. Ranger Mankis went and talked with the family and filled out a missing persons questionnaire and also completed a search urgency chart. All members of the family were interviewed about Dale's abilities and proclivities, so I will just compile some of the important bits here. Deneen stated that Dale wouldn't want to admit that he is lost, but would probably stay put after dark. Investigators were told that Dale was unafraid of steep edges and cliffs, and that he would be unlikely to scramble up or down anything steep unless he had to. Deneen also said that Dale would never harm himself. Dale was not very attuned to his surroundings and could get turned around in his own backyard. At home, Dale would walk an average of 5 to 6 miles a day. He liked to camp at Garner State Park, where there are hills and caves to explore. Dale would plow through brush, not caring about the terrain. He will see something and set a goal to get to it, not giving up until that goal is reached. Dale always took water on his walks, and if he knew he would be hiking 2.8 miles, he would have taken some with him. Dale would watch survival reality shows and comment on what he would do in their situation. If lost, he would walk until he found something. If he was hurt, he would go back the way he came. Nobody in the family believed that Dale would disappear on purpose. They believed that if Dale was still able, he would be up and walking, not waiting for rescue. An interpretive ranger, Caitlin Kuntz, was already out hiking the Petroglyph Point Trail and was at the petroglyph panel itself when dispatcher Samantha contacted her and told her about the missing hiker. Ranger Kuntz then began hiking the trail backwards while looking and calling Dale's name. At around 8:20 p.m., Ranger Mankis started hiking the Spruce Canyon Trail backwards from the Hogan Loop. Ranger Kempf responded to the area and started hiking the Spruce Canyon Trail forwards at 8:43 p.m. At approximately 8:48 p.m., Ranger Kuntz reported that she thought she heard someone calling for help. However, she later decided that it was other rangers she heard calling out Dale's name. She also saw a light, but it turned out that that was other rangers as well. At 9:08 p.m., Rangers Kempf and Mankis met at the junction of the Spruce Canyon Trail and the Springhouse Trail. The Springhouse Trail heads south, deeper into the canyons. They saw no one and their calls were unanswered. At this point, they had covered areas both above and in the Spruce Canyon. They all returned to the Chief Ranger's office after sweeping the trails a second time. At this point, more assistance was requested. The Mesa Top Loop was checked and a foot patrol was done to the west of the road by multiple personnel. Chapin Mesa was checked on foot by 2 teams of fire personnel. They covered pretty much every location, road, and trail up on the mesa. Ranger Kempf was stationed at the Petroglyph Point Trail and the Spruce Canyon Trail junction for containment purposes. Ranger Mankis was stationed at the Spruce Canyon Trail exit, also for containment. After Chapin Mesa had been swept, all units were recalled due to the time of night and safety concerns. There were no reported sightings or responses to calls. All responding personnel were out of service by 11:27 p.m. and were expected to return by 6 a.m. the next day. The Stehling family were taken to quarters within the park where they could spend the night as the search continued. Rangers answered their questions as best they could and showed them on a map all of the areas that had been searched so far. Starting Monday, June 10th, a briefing was held at 6 a.m. at the Chief Ranger's office, which was now designated as the Incident Command Post, or ICP. Chief Ranger Jesse Farias was designated as the incident commander. One of the first things that coordinators wanted to do was bring in some search dogs, so Dale's parents went back to Gallup to get some scent articles and medication from the incapacitated RV and bring it back. An interview was done with Dale Stehling as well, and she was asked multiple questions about Dale, but much of it is redacted. Based on the few words that are readable, it appears the discussion is about Dale's health and also some medication he might be taking. Pieces of sentences such as Stehling has used blank off and on for the past 13 years, and she is positive he has blank with him on this trip, and Stehling has been blank for a year but since February has become more blank. All of this seems to indicate some critical and private information that could be something that might affect his decision-making process. Deneen told the interviewer that Dale was a walker, not a hiker, and that he would be gone for hours and could walk far if something caught his attention. She said he is not a survivalist, an avid camper, or an outdoorsman, and she did describe him as directionally challenged. Something interesting and previously unknown was that the Air Force was monitoring Dale's cell phone number every 15 minutes for the first 48 hours of his disappearance, and it appears to indicate that Dale had worked with the Air Force. They were going to report if there was any activity on his cell phone. Dale's affiliation with the military was not something I had previously seen, but certain parts of the report seem to mention that Dale comes from a hard military background. On the investigative side of things, they were trying to definitively prove that Dale was in the park and that the incident was not somehow fraudulent. They showed pictures of Dale to rangers working in the museum, but none of them remembered seeing him. When Dale's parents returned to the park, they apparently forgot to grab scent articles for the dogs, and when interviewed, everything they said fell in line with what Deneen said happened. Security footage from the visitor center was eventually able to confirm that Dale had actually entered the park. On Tuesday, June 11th, missing persons posters were made and distributed throughout the park. Again, one of the Stehlings left the park early in the morning to go to the RV and grab some scent items for the search dogs to use. They arrived back around 1:45 p.m. and the scent articles were collected and distributed to the search dog handlers. On this same day, an unidentified group, though almost certainly retired Judge Jess Vigil and his family, stopped by the ICP. They had seen the missing persons posters and believed they had seen Dale hiking the Petroglyph Trail on Sunday evening. They gave an accurate description of Dale and confirmed it was him when they were shown a picture. On the day of the disappearance, the family signed in on the trail register around 4 p.m., and they saw Dale around this time. In fact, they saw him bypass the trail register and just start walking down the Petroglyph Trail. The family saw Dale a second time when they were on the trail, and he was sitting in a small alcove just above the trail. Dale asked the family members if they knew how far it was to the end. They told him he was about halfway. Dale responded that it was too late to go back now, and after a minute, he got up and started down the trail again. The family stayed in the alcove a while before continuing on themselves. At approximately 5:30 p.m., the family caught up with Dale once again, this time at the Petroglyph panel. Dale commented on how fast they walked. He continued on down the trail shortly after the family arrived. They stayed to observe the panel for a while before leaving. After the panel, the family came to a point in the trail where there was a sign that said Museum, with an arrow pointing left. However, since that way involved scrambling up a bit of rock, they didn't think it was the correct way to go. They also saw a sign with a small arrow pointing to the right, so they went that way. They quickly discovered that this was a lesser-used trail and they only followed it for a few feet before realizing they couldn't go much further, so they turned around. Before moving on, one of the family turned the small arrow sign to the left so that it would point the correct way. They did not see Dale for the rest of their hike. Now, if you've already seen the first video on this case, you'll know how important this information is. This family is definitely Jess Vigil and his family. They came out later and did media interviews and showed a picture of Dale on the trail. I personally do not recall seeing this sign when I hiked the Petroglyph Trail in the last video, and the fact that there was a sign with an arrow pointing to the right is very dangerous. The correct path is to the left, and you have to scramble up quite a bit. I mean, it's a bit of a climb. Dale did not or could not scramble up and down hillsides, perhaps due to past injury. So we have a misleading arrow pointing in incorrect direction, and Dale's reluctance to try climbing up steep areas. This is the perfect recipe for getting someone like him lost. So let's continue on. After being interviewed, investigators realized that everything the family said fit with the description of Dale. They also had last seen him at the petroglyph panel, which put Dale about 1.5 miles further than previously known information. This detailed interview with Jess Vigil provides far more information than we previously knew about his experience running into Dale on the trail. On Wednesday, June 12th, it was already suspected that the search would now be about the recovery of a body. A bolo, or be on the lookout, was put out for Dale in the unlikely chance that he had walked his way outside of the park. Investigators also attempted to speak with Dale's doctor, and after overcoming some issues with HIPAA, they were able to do an interview, the contents of which are unknown. On Thursday, June 13th, an investigator stopped by the family's housing quarters and spoke to a family member, likely Deneen, in order to pursue the idea that Dale may no longer be in the park. Deneen said that Dale had no money with him and that she had been monitoring their financial situation closely when she discovered the drug use. So that's an interesting point and might be a hint about some of the previously redacted conversations investigators had with Deneen. The investigator asked Deneen how Dale purchased the baseball cap at the visitors center, and she said she had given him a bank card, which he had given back. Deneen was asked to check her purse, and she did so. The card was not there, indicating that Dale still had it. And before we continue, I want to briefly talk about this. I don't reveal this information lightly. I always try to put myself in the position of, if I was a family member and I saw this video, how would I feel about it? But I have to balance that with information that might be relevant to the disappearance itself. Addiction is something a lot of people suffer from. I'm in recovery myself, so I'm very sensitive to the topic. If there wasn't a possibility that it was relevant to the disappearance, I wouldn't bring it up. As it happens, it might be, despite the fact that we know very little details about it. I hate to even speculate about it, but he could have gotten hurt while in the military and then hooked on pain pills, and it's as simple as that. It's happened to a lot of people. One note in the files says that Dale was pain-free and feeling good while at the visitors center. I think that's just another clue that this was a man who was suffering. Sometimes mental health issues can play a large role in the causes of disappearances. It was a big issue in the Aaron Hedges disappearance, for those who remember that. To leave out the addiction aspect of that case is to basically hide the explanation for what occurred. I don't know if it's the same here, it might not be, but I do think it's worth mentioning. Moving on, investigators received Dale's cell phone log from AT&T on this day as well. They saw the last outgoing call was at 2:30 p.m. the day before he disappeared, and the last incoming call was at 1:11 p.m., 6 minutes before he was on camera at the visitors center. The call went to voicemail and was from one of Dale's friends. They called this friend and interviewed him. He described Dale as a loner who loved nature and his family. He believed that if Dale took a good fall of 8 to 10 feet, then he wouldn't be able to move very well. He believed that if Dale was lost, he wouldn't quit and he would keep moving. Hey folks, while editing I found something that I wanted to throw in here. I discovered a post made online by Dale's sister, Marcy Stehling. In it, she states that Dale was not in the military, but his father was, and that he did have a back injury that left him in pain. Given that information, I do wonder why Dale's phone would be monitored by the Air Force, but then again, trying to interpret records that have heavy redactions can lead to this kind of thing. I am also fairly certain this is genuinely Dale's sister because she has numerous posts online detailing her experience and feelings surrounding her brother's disappearance. So, FYI, it appears that Dale was not in the military after all. After June 13th, there is no updated incident report, which indicates to me that the search was scaled back after that day. Still, searches for Dale would occur periodically, and those were documented in the report. For example, one occurred in July of 2017, where personnel went out to the petroglyph panel and made their way downslope, searching the canyon area below. They found nothing except a non-human animal bone. On another search in roughly the same area, they found some pieces of tin foil. Plenty of other searches occurred, sometimes involving canine units that were trying to sniff out human remains, and there was the occasional hit of something. One is documented as being to the south of the intersection of Spruce and Navajo Canyon. Another canine search showed mild to moderate interest down Navajo Canyon. The presumption of the handler was that whatever piqued the dog's interest, it was significantly further down Navajo Canyon. Still, it appears that most of the searching was done in areas south of Spruce Canyon, based on the reports and labeled maps. One thing I was surprised to see, or rather not see, in this case file was the story of Jody Peterson. Jody was a woman who wrote an article about how she had hiked the Petroglyph Trail the day after Dale disappeared, and that she had heard someone calling for help down in the canyon when she was near the Petroglyph panel. Jody then returned to the Spruce Terrace and went to the Chief Ranger's office to report what she had heard. She describes the Chief Ranger as being relieved, and he told her that someone had heard calls for help in that same area the day before. Jody left the area believing that Dale would be found, but he wasn't. I couldn't find an interview with Jody or anything even remotely resembling her testimony in the over 300-page case file. I find that kind of strange, and you can deduce one of two things from that. Either Jody made this story up for some reason, or the Park Service chose not to create a supplemental report about a witness who heard cries for help in the area where someone disappeared. And to be honest, I have to think it's the latter, because Jody's story contains a bit of information that nobody could confirm until now. Jody said that the Chief Ranger mentioned someone else hearing cries for help the night before, and that turns out to be true, but how would Jody know that this incident occurred? Obviously, the first person who thought they heard cries for help would later decide that they were coming from rangers calling Dale's name. Still, it appears to me that Jody's story is legitimate, but it's nowhere to be found in the case file. I was curious what the NPS did in response to her hearing cries for help near the panel, but we'll probably never know. Before we get into the discovery of the remains, you may recall from the last video that there were really only two theories that I presented. One was the theory that Dale was found in a remote and off-limits part of the park. This theory was based on a description given by the park spokeswoman after his remains were discovered. She said his remains were found in a remote and off-limits part of the park, west of the town of Durango. Many people took this to mean that Dale was found somewhere to the northeast of his last known location, and I would interpret it that way as well. That is really the only direction where the park becomes remote. But how could someone get somewhere like that? There's so many canyons that he would have had to cross, it seems totally undoable. Some say it's portals. The other option, the Occam's razor option as I put it, basically the simplest, most obvious explanation, was that Dale fell into the Spruce Canyon and walked up north into one of the many offshoot canyons. But these areas wouldn't really qualify as remote as described by the park. They're all near main roads. He would have had to pass or cross trails at the bottom of the canyon, and he could have easily walked back up Spruce Canyon and returned to the terrace. Maybe you had a different theory about what happened. I saw some people said that maybe he left the park completely, despite what the Park Service said. I thought that was a valid theory as well. And once again, we finally get to know the answer to this question. And the answer is, there is a reason they call it Occam's razor. On September 16th of 2020, Mesa Verde Chief Ranger Jess Farias was contacted by the Investigative Services Branch about possible information concerning the disappearance of Dale Stehling. The ISB received an anonymous tip on their online tip form from someone stating they had found Dale's remains while hiking in the East Fork Canyon of the park. This area is closed to the public. The individual stated that the remains were in the middle of a riverbed and not hard to find. The original online tip form was included in the case file. In it, the submitter has to describe the what, where, and when of the tip. The tipster says they did not disturb the site at all and identified the body by a debit card that was sticking out of his wallet. They say they didn't take anything or even open the wallet, and that his cell phone was nearby along with a belt and both shoes. They give some coordinates, but punching them in, you quickly discover they are incorrect. Usually when this happens, it's because they messed up a single number, and I quickly figured out which one it was and found the correct spot where the remains were discovered. This location is quite a ways up Navajo Canyon, but practically right next to the Farview sites, a location I visited when I was in Mesa Verde. Basically, in my opinion, this location is about as far from remote as you can get. It's maybe a mile from a popular tourist site. On September 17th at 12:40 p.m., agents and rangers hiked into the East Fork Canyon via the Farview site to investigate the report. The investigators also discovered the coordinates were incorrect, but figured things out anyway, and the remains were found at approximately 1:45 p.m. They were about 4.2 miles from where Dale was last seen back in 2013. A Texas driver's license, credit card, and social security card indicated that the remains were presumably those of Dale Stehling. No indications of foul play were discovered in the immediate area. As the coroner collected the evidence and the remains at the scene, rangers searched the area for more evidence or bones that may have been scattered due to weather and animals. The investigation was completed and all human remains collected around 5 p.m. that day, at which point the team hiked back out of the canyon towards the Farview site. The coroner's report indicates that the skeleton was mostly complete with some bones missing. Portions of the report are redacted, mostly relating to Dale's medical history. Some of the bones showed evidence of animal predation. In the end, the remains were consistent with a male of roughly Dale's age and height. In the end, I think we really got a full explanation in this case. In other cases, even when remains are found, we don't always get that. We have Dale Stehling. He's a pretty good walker on flat terrain, but his body is in pretty rough shape. He's in pain, maybe from some past injury or something else. He could be addicted to some substance, maybe pain pills, but we really don't know. There's a big question about how this might have affected his behavior and decision-making, but that information has all been redacted. Other than that, Dale is directionally challenged and would try to walk his way out of a situation like being lost. His family describe him almost like a Terminator or something, a guy who just keeps walking without regard for directions or where he's going. He just keeps walking and plowing his way through whatever is in front of him. I think it's important to keep all of this in mind as we go through the timeline of Dale's disappearance. I also want to clearly show the layout of this location. The Spruce Tree Terrace resides atop the Spruce Canyon. The petroglyph trail runs along the side of the Spruce Canyon. To the left of Spruce Canyon, there are Wickup and Navajo Canyons. These are his only other options for a northward direction of travel. You could go south in this area and follow the canyon for 7 to 8 miles and you would eventually reach a road. But for anyone winding up in the canyon here, the best and most obvious direction should be to go back up Spruce Canyon, where there are trails, people, and safety. Let's get into the timeline. Dale leaves his family at the start of the trailhead at the Spruce Tree Terrace. He walks down the paved walkway towards the Spruce Tree House. He is seen by the Vihill family while they are signing the petroglyph trail register. He casually bypasses them, walking down the petroglyph trail and away from the Spruce Tree House. Everything about their description makes it sound like Dale was not paying attention to what he was doing and where he was going. So Dale starts down the trail. Eventually, he stops to rest, which is very consistent with what his family says about him. He asks a member of the Vihill family how much further he has to go. They tell him he's about halfway, and he says it's too late to turn back. This is more indication that he had no idea what trail he was on, where it went, or how long it was. Dale is again seen by the Vihill family at the petroglyph panel. He doesn't say anything of substance, but they see him walk off after they arrive. This is the last time Dale is seen alive. But I think the most important part is what the Vihill family describes next. They come to the end of the canyon portion of the trail. This is where you have to actually climb up some large stones. I didn't really get any good footage of it while I was there because I needed to be able to use my hands. Anyway, you come to the end of the trail and you have to climb up the canyon wall to the left. I don't recall seeing any sign being there. I just remember looking around and recognizing it was the only real way to continue on. But I was there over a decade after this incident, The sign was likely removed, and I knew the shape of the trail, the length of it, and I had a GPS. When the Vihil family was there in 2013, there was a sign that said museum, which makes sense because the loop trail takes you back to the museum. There was also an arrow sign, but it was pointing the wrong way. It was pointing to the right. The Vihil family instinctively went down this incorrect path because it seemed to make more sense to them than having to climb up the rock face. But they quickly realized that the trail they were on was old and incorrect. I would bet my money that Dale did the exact same thing the Vihil family did, but he kept going. In my last video, I mentioned that All Trails shows a short spur trail right in this area that leads down into the canyon. I didn't see it while I was there, but it is evidence of a trail in that area, and it seems highly likely that it was the trail that Dale took, and one way or the other, it took him down into the canyon. Once he was down there, he would have lost the trail completely, and all of his family seemed to indicate that he was not in good enough shape to scramble up rock faces if he fell or got lost. Dale going down the wrong path seems to make more sense than a fall. You would think if he fell, he would have immediately called for help and the judge and his family would have been right there in the area, but they heard nothing. I think that perhaps Dale was just wandering down the spur trail when he went off trail and was just not paying attention. Eventually, he must have got to the bottom and that was that. Calls for help may or may not have been heard in this area later on in the evening and into the next day. We can't really confirm what those people heard, but Deneen seemed to think that Dale would stay put after dark, so maybe he did, and that's why calls for help were heard by Jody the following day. But ultimately, Dale's family did seem to agree that if he could walk, he would walk. So I imagine that at some point, Dale just started walking. And because searchers were not stationed at the mouth of Navajo Canyon, or even Spruce Canyon for that matter, Dale was able to walk right by the search perimeter. Normally, you'd think that a person in this position would have just been able to walk north, back along Spruce Canyon, and link up with one of the many trails in the area and make it to safety. But instead, it appears Dale walked north into Navajo Canyon, crossing the Springhouse Trail and moving 4 miles up the canyon before dying. Had he stayed put, he likely would have been found. Had he moved back up Spruce Canyon, the same canyon that houses the Petroglyph Trail, he would have certainly been found. But Dale was directionally challenged. His family makes it sound like he would just walk without thinking about it too much. Originally, I couldn't see how Dale could miss the obvious path back up Spruce Canyon, but now I'm thinking that maybe he could, based on everything his family said about it. He really tried to walk his way out of there, but Navajo Canyon is long, and he didn't know enough about the park and its layout to realize that he wasn't walking in a good direction. And to really give you a good image of the path Dale took, this video is of me at roughly the midpoint of the Petroglyph Trail, right where the canyon part of it ends and you're forced to climb up to the mesa. To get the shot, I walked off trail a bit and stood on a large boulder. The big canyon in the top right corner is the direction Dale went. He must have gone down the steep hillside around here and walked into the mouth of that canyon, which splits shortly after entering it. He would have ended up taking the right-hand canyon, which is Navajo. From this bird's eye view, I can't help but think how difficult it would be for me to get confused and walk that direction if I went down into the canyon. But then again, I'm sure things seem different when you're actually down there. Maybe Dale really did lose track of which canyon he came out of. The Park Service, for their part, seemingly chose to withhold information for absolutely no reason. I mean, this location is not remote. It's right next to a road. It's not inside any protected ruins, it's in a dry riverbed. So the Park Service lost a bit of credibility with their complete misdirection. They also stated that this area was searched before, but I can literally find no evidence of that. Everything I've seen shows that the search was all in and around the Petroglyph Trail area. But given the information they learned about Dale and his willingness to walk himself out of being lost, I do think they should have sent people up those canyons when the search was happening. And I hate to make comments like that. You know, hindsight is 20/20. I wasn't there on the ground at the time and all that. But given what they were told about Dale, you would think it would cross their minds that he could have walked north up one of those canyons after getting stuck down there. And there's also something to be learned here about staying put and trying to signal people instead of moving. I mean, the one thing that crossed my mind that I would have done in this situation, and if I knew nothing about the layout of the park or where I was, is use the lighter. It is mentioned multiple times that Dale had a lighter with him for his cigarettes, and he could make fire. There is a ton of dry brush down in that canyon. Now, I'm not suggesting he start a wildfire or anything, but I would clear out a large circular area of anything burnable, create a big space that is all dirt or even rock, and then make a small pile of some dry brush and light it up. The searchers would have probably seen that fairly quickly, and you can really minimize the risk of creating a wildfire if you do things properly. I wonder if it ever crossed his mind to try and set a signal fire somewhere. Ultimately, I think it was Dale's desire to handle things himself that may have killed him. So many disappearances end in death because the individual attempts to walk their way out without really knowing where they're walking to. Instead, it's far more beneficial to stop and think your way through the situation. What do you have to work with that can help you? If you know you're still near a trail, then stay put instead of wandering around and hoping to find it. It would seem that a lot of factors combine to create this incident, but that's how it almost always is. You have Dale, known as the Walking Man, maybe not paying attention. You have misleading signage. Dale is only good on flat terrain. It was a recipe for disaster. But once again, we have a case where the lack of information made it seem strange or unnatural. This is a missing 411 case where it was suggested that Dale fell into a portal or something and got transported somewhere else. This was a case where the NPS released misleading information. But in the end, when all of the information comes out, a scenario forms that really kind of makes sense. I could see how the scenario I described could have happened. And it all comes down to the flaws in the way people think, the way they act, and even the terrible signage used by the NPS. Either way, we now know the truth about the disappearance and death of Dale Stehling. As is often the case, the cause is very human. So until next time, thanks for watching.